It's no secret, Oregon has had a meth problem for years, but recently the drug itself has changed, worsening mental health problems for users.
We have seen how methamphetamine is inducing a kind of toxic delirium, a kind of really agitated mental state.
So what exactly is the new meth? On a related note, Portland's street response team is expanding, and they might finally get the funding to respond to people in crisis all across the city.
The community members are excited that they're finally coming into their neighborhood.
So let's take a look at that and the future of public safety in Portland.
We get dozens of phone calls and emails at my office every day, demanding that the city do a better job at keeping Portlanders safe.
Here's the story.
Welcome to The Story. I'm Pat Doris. Maggie's taking some time off, so I'll be your host for the next few days. This is still the same show, though. Your feedback drives our content. All the ways to contact us are right here at the bottom of your screen. The email is thestory@kgw.com or use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW on Twitter. Now, as we get going, let's just remember no one is perfect. We all make mistakes, even us, although we do try really hard not to. Sometimes those mistakes are just a typo in a graphic. This week, a sheriff's office in Washington learned just how embarrassing that can be. Like everyone else, the Spokane County Sheriff's Office is dealing with a staffing shortage, so they bought these big billboards in Times Square all the way across the country to try to attract applicants. You can see they're offering $15,000 signing bonuses. Okay, now let's zoom in. See that? Yeah, they didn't exactly spell Washington right. They forgot the G in there. Well, people on Twitter pointed this out, and the sheriff's office says, yeah, they're getting it fixed. They also thanked the, quote, so-called elites that only have the time to revel in a typo. Not sure how elite it is to spell your state's name correctly on a giant digital ad that you paid a good amount for, but maybe it was on purpose. They're certainly getting a lot of free media about this. We looked it up, by the way. These billboards can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 a day, so they are not cheap. Let's talk some more about cops in Portland. Remember through the smoke of the riots 2 summers ago when so many called for reforms in policing? Well, one of the things that happened was the disbanding of a special team of officers that focused on guns and gun violence. Now, we are not going to debate that move again. We've done it several times, and it's long since happened. But at the time, you might recall the police union said it was a terrible idea. Need a refresher?
Well, obviously, that's a catastrophic mistake. It'll resonate shockwaves through the community as public safety. Our citizens are at risk. Obviously, units like the Gun Violence Reduction Task Force, they go to thousands of calls of gunfire. They've taken hundreds of guns off the street. They've arrested hundreds of people who are violent gun offenders and respond to thousands of calls of thousands of bullets that have been sprayed in our neighborhoods, in our homes, in our parks, in our cars, and a place where we recreate. So that's going to be a huge, catastrophic issue for safety in the city of Portland.
Well, now a lot of people would say you nailed it back then. He was absolutely right. Back then, the police also warned that officers, the people actually on the front lines of keeping the city safe, were not being appreciated and might start heading toward the exit. And man, did they ever. Roughly 150 officers quit or retired from then till now. And here we are with a little bit of a problem. Record shootings, record number of murders, and there's not nearly enough cops in the city, according to the mayor. So now he wants to hire hundreds more. He'll need support from the city council, the same body, although not the same people, who cut $15 million from the cops' budget in the summer of 2020. One of the new members is a public safety supporter, Mingus Maps. I had a chance to talk with him today.
The sense I get is that a lot of officers who have retired or gone on to other departments were frustrated by some of the statements in the past. They sort of felt vilified and not appreciated, and they were doing a dangerous job and nobody had their back. So why would you stick around? But I know that you've been a supporter of public safety since August when you started campaigning for the position, and probably earlier. But how do you change that atmosphere?
Well, I think the reality is the atmosphere has changed. I think Portlanders have a new appreciation for the important work that that the police department does. Doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement. There are important reforms that we still need to make. But I think that we see our public safety needs much more clearly than we did a little bit ago.
As you were just talking about hiring more cops, it reminded me of something I saw on Twitter or somewhere on social media. Someone saying the only thing hiring more cops is going to do is have another generation of Black men feel like they're oppressed in the city of Portland.
Well, I will point out that more people have been killed in gun crimes in Portland in the past 11 months than we've seen in any year in our city's history. And Portland's been around for 170 years. I'll also tell you that the vast majority of the folks who have been killed in gun violence are people of color. Frankly, they tend to be Black men who look a lot like me. I think that is an equity problem, which the city of Portland has not come to terms with. Frankly, the reforms that we're proposing on public safety in Portland are one of the ways in which we can actually provide justice to people of color who just want to get through their day.
Does he have enough votes to get this through?
You might have to ask him. I will have some questions about some of the specific items in his proposal, but overall, I broadly support the direction he's going in. So I'm pretty sure in the end that the mayor can count on my votes.
My journalistic spidey sense was saying, oh, tell us what you don't like in his package.
Oh, well, one of the things that I was disappointed at in the mayor's budget is the lack of treatment beds that are connected to the behavioral health unit. So again, those are the cops who deal with mentally ill folks who are also violent. The goal here is that instead of taking a violent mentally ill person to jail for, frankly, a couple of hours, those folks at the police department can take them to a treatment center where there's a bed that is reserved for police department clients.
The commissioner said he'll keep pushing for those extra beds. In the meantime, another option for helping people dealing with mental health crisis got a big old boost today. This week, the Portland Streets Response is expanding. Just a few minutes ago, they started their very first night shift. Portland Street Response is meant to keep police from going to calls where they're not really needed. It's for people who are not violent and have mental health or addiction issues, or as we often see, both. Most of the calls they get are for wellness checks. Maybe somebody's laying in the sidewalk or it's an unwanted person on a property. They've been working in the Lentz neighborhood since last February, and last month, a Portland State University study showed police went to 22% fewer non-emergency calls because Portland Street Response handled those instead. This week, the team expanded to most of Southeast Portland. They went from covering 13 square miles to 36 miles and 22 neighborhoods.
The hope is that, we'll continue to get busier and we'll continue to be able to divert calls away from the emergency departments and really help provide a more appropriate response for people who are in need. Right now, we're just responding to calls that are outside, so we're not yet going into residences. But that's what I hope will be the next step here shortly, is for us to continue to expand not only geography, not only across the city and the shifts, but also in the call types that we can take.
They're not yet operating 24/7. The new night shift will respond to calls from 6 till 2:30 a.m. Thursday through Sunday. The rest of the team is there 7 days a week, just not at night. The citywide launch could come as soon as next March if Portland City Council approves the funding. Again, it's a non-police team. They can only go to calls that are non-violent, no weapons present, no crimes happening. But they have worked with Portland Police on some training. Each crew is made up of 4 people, including an EMT and a mental health specialist. If you live in Southeast Portland and you need the team, you can get them by calling 911. Well, we get a lot of questions, concerns, and ideas for solving problems involving mental health and homelessness and the housing crisis. And for goodness sakes, each one of those is a huge issue on its own, and we want to stay on top of them. And we're smarter because you are telling us what you're worried about, what you're frustrated about. So please keep your comments and ideas coming. You can send them via email. The email is thestory@kgw.com, or you can use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW. Here's one we've started to get a lot of recently. Linda wrote, "It's very important to address the drug meth problem in our city before we pay for housing. We also got this one recently from Francis. No one talks about the real issue, meth, and how easy and cheap it is to obtain. And from Veronica, my real concern is when we are going to talk about the meth problem. Well, Veronica, Francis, Linda, all the rest of you, now is when we're going to talk about the meth problem, because it is a big problem and it's quickly growing across the country and right here in Oregon. The Department of Justice just made a huge bust in Portland, taking down 2 trafficking cells that seized, get this, 40 pounds of meth. 40 pounds. And in October, officers made the biggest meth bust in Oregon history. Take a look at this, 384 pounds of meth, worth more than $1 million, somebody's gonna be mad, along with stolen guns and thousands in cash. So yeah, you might say we got a bit of a problem. Now, let's get to an article in The Atlantic that several of you sent to us. It's a long one, but it's worth your time if you haven't read it yet. And by the way, there's no paywall, you can just Google it. It's a deep dive into the changing world of drugs in the United States. It's brought on by the arrival of a new way of making methamphetamine. The author, Sam Quiones, described the way meth production has shifted in the last 15 years. You see, meth used to be primarily made from ephedrine. That's the stuff that's in Sudafed and other cold meds. It's why you and me and nobody else in Oregon can buy them over the counter anymore. You have to go to the pharmacy. Well, those regulations have made it harder to make meth. And then the legalization of marijuana took big money out of the pockets of the cartels. They were not happy. So they started making what officials are now calling P2P meth. They can make it quickly, and as a result, it's spreading across the U.S. According to that article, because the drug market has been flooded with meth, the price has fallen dramatically. And it is awful, by the way. P2P meth severely damages the brains of people who use it, and it creates or makes worse mental health and addiction disorders, which makes some of our most stubborn problems even worse. Things like overburdened mental health facilities and homelessness. The article cites Portland and Central Oregon as places that are seeing problems with this. We wanted to get some stats. The Mental Health Addiction Association of Oregon says meth is now a leading cause of drug-related deaths in Portland. And across the state, overdose deaths have increased dramatically over the last 15 years. In 2010, according to the state medical examiner, 43 people died from meth in Oregon, and that was awful. But 9 years later, in 2019, that number was 289 people. That's in line with the number of people dying from opioid overdoses. We took this topic to Central City Concern. They provide services for people who need help with mental illness, drug addiction, housing, and other issues. They say they also have noticed the increase in meth use, but they say there's a lot going on.
I think that we're seeing an increased level of agitation in general. And I would say it's multifactorial. I think methamphetamine is a part of it. I think trying to survive on the street during a pandemic is part of it. The absence of support and resources kind of in the community that we used to have, that have naturally abated during the pandemic has been a part of it. Difficulty with access to other services. So again, as I said, as you really think about it in the big picture, you feel it. You feel issues around agitation and personal angst and safety on the street, and some of it is perhaps really is related to methamphetamine, but there's this whole other host of factors in people's experience these days that needs to be taken into account as well.
You know things are tough when you got to have a hard hat in your office, by the way. She says there does seem to be ready access to drugs here in Portland and that people are using it for all kinds of reasons in all kinds of places, from social settings to the streets.
I know a lot of parents with kids over 5 years old are feeling a huge relief now that they can get them vaccinated. But what about really young kids like babies and toddlers? When might they be able to get a COVID shot? We asked the Surgeon General.
They fully understand how important it is to get a vaccine to protect our children, but they don't want to cut any corners in doing so.
When the story continues.
Welcome back, and keep your comments and questions coming. By the way, Gail from Vancouver, thank you for pointing out that the light behind me went out. Yeah, we know. It's that kind of show, though, gang. Let us know. And we see you, Gail. Let us know what you're thinking about. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com or use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW on Twitter. I want to remind you about our Hey Help campaign. This week, we're asking you to consider donating to Discover Your Northwest to help them repair the recent vandalism. Look at this at Coldwater Lake Recreational Area at Mount St. Helens. Last month, toilets in the restrooms were smashed and sinks also damaged. Who does that? Well, if you want to donate to help repair that, just hold your phone's camera up to this QR code and it will take you to the donation page. You can also go to kgw.com/heyhelp. This is a micro donation drive. You don't have to give millions, although they'd probably love it if you did. You can feel free, though, to give any amount, no matter how small. Well, it's finally a day a lot of parents have been waiting for. Kids between 5 and 11 years old can now get a Pfizer COVID vaccine. The FDA, CDC, and the Western States Group have all signed off on it. And yes, they all reviewed the safety data in Pfizer's trial for kids, which, by the way, did not find a single severe reaction related to the vaccine. However, one child in the trial did swallow a penny, so that was recorded as a severe adverse event for transparency's sake. Ashley Korsland joins us now. You had a chance to talk to the Surgeon General today. Kind of cool. He has a couple of kids. What's he say about this?
Yeah, so Dr. Vivek Murthy has 2 children, ages 3 and 5. So the 5-year-old now eligible with that 5 to 11-year-old age group that's next up for the shot. You know, he said just like a lot of parents, he's got questions about safety and does it work? And those were his 2 big things. Is it safe for my kid? Is it going to be effective? He says, yes, it is safe. He totally trusts the science and the research that went into this vaccine. Now, as for whether it's going to work for this age group, he says, yes, 90% is what the trials showed us. It's 90% effective, the vaccine is, at preventing symptomatic infection in these kids. He also wants to point out there's lots of misinformation out there, and his plea is to really urge parents to go to trusted sources, your pediatrician, the health department, your doctor, and ask them for their opinion.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to trust us, although of course you should. What about kids under the age of 5? Will there be a shot for them?
So I did ask Dr. Murthy about that, and he says it's going to be a little while, so parents need to sit tight. He is anticipating that it won't be available for kids under 5 until at least the start of the new year. So I did press him on that a little bit to get his opinion, and here's what he had to say about it.
They fully understand how important it is to get a vaccine to protect our children. Getting vaccines in general to the population on COVID is their top priority. But they don't want to cut any corners in doing so. They want to follow the same rigorous standards they've always had because they want parents to know that they can be confident in the recommendations that they're making because nothing's more important ultimately than the health and the safety of our children.
Well, that is interesting. Also, you asked him about his stance on the vaccine mandate for students. Interested to hear what he had to say about that.
Yeah, I was very curious because, as we know, there are school districts around the country either that have imposed this or certain states are imposing this or looking at a vaccine mandate for students. Right. And when I asked Dr. Murthy about this, he didn't really answer it. He sort of punted that question, saying he defers to local and state officials to make those decisions. So really a non-answer on that. I couldn't get him to commit, but his point was, look, parents are going to have questions. People need to give parents grace, and they should have questions. They should be asking a lot and digging in for the data and wanting to know. He says, at the end of the day, we all care about the safety of our kids, and that's what it comes down to.
Yep, and if getting them vaccinated makes them safe, makes it a pretty simple answer.
Personal decision there, but yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you very much, Ashley.
Yeah.
Remember this summer after the big heat wave, how the mountains around here looked pretty darn bare? Well, a new study says get used to it, because the Cascades might not have much of a snowpack by the end of the century. When the story continues. Welcome back. Here's another thing to worry about. If you're excited about the ski season, you better savor it while you can. A new study says there might not be enough snow to ski on Mount Hood in 50 years. In fact, the Cascades might not have snow at all by 2070. Keely Chalmers brings this cheery story with the scientists behind the research.
When you think of Mount Hood over the decades, there's a good chance images like these come to mind. Deep snow. This is video of scientists measuring that deep snow back in 1979. In fact, crews measure its depth every year to determine water supplies for the coming season. Farmers depend on that snow melt for their crops, but they might not be able to for too much longer.
Coastal mountain ranges such as the Cascades may face more amplified losses.
Dr. Alan Rhodes is concerned. Rhodes is a researcher with the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. After analyzing snowpack data and projected temperature rise, he found that peak annual snowpack in the Cascades could decrease by about a quarter in the next 30 years. And by the end of the century,
we found that this low to no snow might occur in the next 35 to 60 years. And so that, low to no snow implies that there's going to be dramatic impacts for our water supply.
Rhodes says the snow simply can't compete with rising temperatures.
It's just the freezing point of water is non-negotiable, right? It's just that as we continue to warm more and more, we can't have below freezing conditions be maintained for long periods of time.
In the decades to come, ski seasons will become increasingly shorter. Resorts will have to rely more on artificial snow, which is energy intensive and costly.
And then eventually, if it gets warm enough, it's just virtually impossible to keep, producing artificial snow to meet skier needs. So yeah, in some regions at maybe lower elevations, those ski resorts would likely be pretty dramatically impacted.
Rhodes hopes his research will shine the spotlight on snowpack as an impact of climate change that is just as important as sea level rise, wildfires, and extreme weather events. His goal is to help identify ways managers might be able to overcome snow loss, find ways to mitigate it, and prepare for a warmer, less snowy future. Keely Chalmers, KGW News.
All right, keep your questions and comments coming in to the story at kgw.com and find us on social media. We're going to finish the story right after this. Before we go, I do want to revisit my interview with Portland City Commissioner Mingus Mapps. We played some of it for you at the top of the show, and he talked about public safety, and it was great. But there is one moment that I left out that he wanted me to air.
At least some of them are angry about is the reduction of the GVR. I'm sorry, I'm fighting my cat.
That is completely okay. That's great. We love to see your cat. We definitely have to put this on the air.
No, never. I'm so sorry about that.
Oh no, that's great.
Oh yeah, it was really great. That was Russell the cat. Hey, pick up your phone, follow us on Twitter at TheStory, KGW, or email thestory@kgw.com. That is the end of the story, so let's bring on Laurel Porter now. Laurel?
I'm glad Commissioner Mapps made you run that. That was too great to meet Russell. Thanks, Pat. Coming up, we're talking about Portland public school teachers. A majority of them are feeling overwhelmed and stretched thin. The news at 6:30 starts now.
This